Welcome to Making Change Radio here on Radio Fairfax. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're talking with Sonia Patterson. She is the Afghan Resettlement Coordinator for Rotary District 7610. As many of you may know, I am a Rotarian. I've been a Rotarian for 13 years in the Rotary Club of Centerville and Chantilly, and Sonia is a Rotarian in the Vienna Club. And a decision was made, I think at the highest levels, by our district governor, Pat Borowski, that Rotary would be involved in working with the effort to resettle Afghan families arriving here in Northern Virginia. And so Sonia stepped up and said, I'll be the one. And I had the pleasure of hearing her give a presentation to my Rotary Club. And there is a lot of information around this. And so I'm delighted that Sonia can come on and share with you some of the things you want to think about if you're thinking about how can we help these families coming to Northern Virginia. So welcome, Sonia. I'm delighted to have you here.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for this opportunity. This is fantastic. I'm so thrilled to be here and to discuss this and really help get the word out about what the needs are and help people respond appropriately and effectively and just do the kinds of things that we need to do as a community to welcome our new neighbors.
So Rotarians are all something else in real life. And so, so obviously, and the Vienna Rotary Club is a very large club. Mine's a very small club. Yours is a very large club. Most people know you as the people who do Viva Vienna every year.
That's exactly right.
Over Memorial Day. So what brought you, to the point where you raised your hand and said, I think I can help with this coordination?
Well, that's a great, the $1 million question. So essentially what happened was back when the refugees first started arriving at Dulles Airport, my background is 25 years of nonprofit government management and experience, what have you. And so I've seen what responses need and how they should be organized, but I didn't see any of that happening. And I knew that everyone wanted to help, but no one knew exactly how to help. And so I just personally, I stepped up, started organizing community meetings, getting people together, all kinds of houses of worship from different faith traditions, Rotary clubs, as we mentioned, lots of different networks like the Peace Corps Community for Refugees, of which I'm a part. So lots of groups came together to sort of figure out, okay, who's doing what? How can we coordinate? How can we make sure that we're not replicating, our efforts here? And really, what is going on? Who's going where? How's this being organized? And so over the course of the months that followed, as the refugees continued to arrive, they were sent off to the safe haven military bases. And we started mounting a response to help at the military bases, and then really preparing people for what it looks like to resettle Afghan families once they transition from the military safe haven bases out into the communities. So we worked in partnership with lots of resettlement agencies. We'll probably get into that a little bit later in our area, in the DMV area. And we are blessed that Northern Virginia is the #1 state for resettling refugees. It's a tremendous honor. We lead the country in lots of different ways. And frankly, this area has so many people who want to be helpful. And so with Rotary's concerned, we got a small task force together. We started organizing. I started meeting with Rotary clubs. I work as a philanthropy consultant. So my day job, if you will, is to help connect sort of the supply and demand of philanthropy. So what does it look like to define, what your philanthropic footprint looks like? How does it happen? How do you figure out where you want to invest and how you want to invest? And so those things that I've learned in my professional capacity have come into play in a big way in this Afghan refugee response that we've been having and continuing to experience here in Northern Virginia.
So, and it's all very dynamic. It's not like people get a lot of warning. And so those of us who have been helping different efforts, starting when refugees were placed at the Dulles Expo Center, and that was the kind of the first wave of the families that came. Now, as of last week, there was a big announcement that out in Loudoun County, the National Conference Center is going to be hosting a fair number of refugees from now, and you're estimating from now until September. And so that's a large influx of refugees coming from what you call lily pads. And so explain a little bit about, how this whole effort is working as far as screening these refugees and where they end up
Mm.
going from these military bases to different parts of the country, how they end up here, and the amount of notice, because it seems like no one really gets a lot of notice before all of a sudden they're coming.
Right. So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. There's a process that is established. Our country has been welcoming refugees for many, many years. And so we have a process that we have established at the US government level, which allows for resettlement agencies. There are 9 resettlement agencies in the United States to run point on resettling asylum seekers, humanitarian parolees, refugees, the different categories of folks coming in, and then how we as a nonprofit sort of civil society come alongside that process to support what they're doing. Lily pads, typically that phrase is used for overseas bases, overseas in Qatar, for example, or other countries where folks that are managing to get out of Afghanistan still have been able to go, and once they get off to these lily pads, they have a lot of processing that takes place, all kinds of security, background checks, immunizations, that kind of thing. And they go through an extensive process of vetting and, an analysis, if you will, of what their needs are, where they're coming from, what family members they may or may not have in the US, and so on and so forth. And previously, up until the point where we're going to be welcoming our refugees at the National Conference Center, we had them going to US military bases. That was through Operation Allies Welcome. Many organizations, up to 300 nonprofits in the US have collaborated on this. This is an extensive humanitarian lift, if you will, that people have stepped up to support the refugees that have been on the bases. And, because they came here with nothing. Really.
Literally the clothes on their backs.
Yeah.
That's it. That some of them didn't have medical records or identification or money or anything.
Right.
For those of you who are just joining us, this is Making Change Radio here on Radio Fairfax. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. And tonight we are talking with Sonia Patterson, who is helping with the Afghan resettlement effort here in Northern Virginia. So let's talk a little bit about who these folks are. It's kind of like if you took a representative group of, 75,000 Americans and tried to sort them, you would find that Americans are not monolithic, and neither are people from Afghanistan, which I think it's hard for us sometimes to wrap our minds around the amount of diversity that exists within any country or group of people. And so there's a lot to figuring out. Language, it's a very tribal country. They're different, there's Sunnis and there's Shiite Muslims. So talk a little bit about, trying to get it right from trying to figure out who these folks are.
Mm-hmm. I think that's absolutely critical. Understanding where they've come from, what their cultural backgrounds are, the Dari speakers, the Pashto speakers, Sunni and Shia Muslim, as you said. We've got folks from very well-to-do families in Afghanistan, and also folks that come from extremely impoverished communities in Afghanistan. So you've got urban and rural, so you have almost every level of difference you can possibly imagine that went through the trauma of having to leave everything behind, having to come to a place brand new, start 100% from scratch, and not know where they're going, what it's going to look like for them, what they're going to do. And that trauma that they've experienced is something that a lot of folks have really spoken to and come alongside and said, we need to support not only what their basic needs are, but really look at that psychosocial aspect as well, in terms of support that we can give to the families who have experienced that trauma. And ultimately, what we need to do is just be super mindful of the cultural differences that we would find. That can be language, obviously, food comes to mind, clothing comes to mind. When we did donation drives early on, Americans tend to be much larger, and so they were donating like extra large, shirts and pants and what have you. And of course, it wasn't necessarily used to the degree that it could have otherwise been. And so just getting the word out, okay, guys, we need to focus on these sizes. We need to focus on this kind of clothing. We need to focus on these kinds of things to support women's hygiene, for example. These are the types of things that are culturally appropriate that we want to be mindful of. And I will tell you that working alongside the Afghan American diaspora in this region has been absolutely the way to go. They have been super supportive, and we can get into some examples of that a little later. But taking from them, having them be our guide in terms of, how we talk about Afghanistan in general. Some people refer to people from Afghanistan as Afghani. It turns out that's the currency. That's, so that's the thing, is that you really have to work on, it's Afghan. You have to be, and these are things we're all learning. People in our country that want to help, they want to do the right thing. It's just a question of learning the right way to talk about these things and the right way to come alongside our new neighbors.
And you touch on something really important, because there was some, I work with BRAS, bringing resources and aid to women's shelters. And Holly put out the call for sanitary supplies, sanitary hygiene supplies, underwear for women and children, everything. Again, different sizes, understanding that it's children and it's women, but there's not a place to warehouse all that stuff. So you had mentioned right. Team Rubicon and some yes. of the agencies that have really kind of figured out a refined way to allow people to donate very specific things, to streamline the delivery of those things, sort of on an as needed, in real time basis, because it's not like you've got at the National Conference Center a warehouse next door where you can put clothes and shoes and food and all of these things. So, and helping people to understand what helping might look like. Touch a little bit on what some of these efforts have looked like so far.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great. I mean, we can certainly take the examples of what we've done at the military bases around the country and use the lessons learned from those experiences when we think about the National Conference Center. To talk about Team Rubicon specifically, what they did was they set up this amazing network on all the military bases. They organized warehouse space. They organized all of the donations that were coming to the bases, and they put up Amazon wish lists so we could share the links with church groups and any interested citizen, and they could go straight on to Amazon, buy the items that were needed, and then those items were sent directly to the base. So you didn't have to worry about somebody driving for 4.5 hours to get to Fort Pickett or whatever the case may be. Things went straight to those bases. It was a fabulous way to get things organized. And that expertise that they have in terms of mounting this kind of humanitarian support and response is something that came in and was just a godsend in so many ways. And I would expect a similar type of framework to be in place. Obviously, we don't know yet which organizations or how exactly things are going to work at the National Conference Center, but what we can be assured of is that there will be a framework, there will be a process, and we as concerned Rotary clubs and others who want to help, there will be ways in which we can plug in.
And that is, I think, what our listeners are really looking for more than anything else. For those of you who are just joining us, this is Making Change Radio here on Radio Fairfax. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and we are talking with Sonia Patterson about relief efforts for the Afghan families that are continuing to arrive in Northern Virginia. So you had mentioned when I heard your presentation on Tuesday about there's kind of two different buckets. There's the sort of immediate relief, meeting the basic needs of people who arrive here who really don't have anything, and then ongoing development, which is housing, jobs, their status here in the United States that allows them to work. So this is not kind of a one and done. This really is a process, and there's so many moving parts to it. Talk a little bit about how people are going to move through some of these centers.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's the concept of the long welcome. So the idea is that we welcome them when they first get here, and then we continue to welcome them along the path of the resettlement that they will be going through their own journey of resettling. And so what does that look like? Well, you've got what I would call short term, and then you've got more long term. So short term would be things like, getting them set up in affordable housing, getting apartments set up, furniture, utensils, beds, things like that for an apartment. And there are organizations that are doing apartment setups. And then more longer term, you're going to look at things like all of these things sort of all have to happen at the same time, which makes things complicated. But, they're going to have to be learning English. They're going to have to learn how to drive. They're going to have to get their kids registered in school. They're going to have to begin to tackle the parts of independent living, if you will, within the United States framework. And so that's a cultural orientation. What does it mean to be in this country? What does that look like? How do I get on a bus? How do I take the metro? All of these things that we really do take for granted in a lot of ways here. They are learning all of those things for the first time. And so many of these families have been blessed to have sponsors. A sponsor circle program has been set up. The sponsor circles basically adopt Afghan families and walk them through that process. That's the job of the resettlement agencies as well. They will get the refugees will be assigned, to these particular agencies across the country, and then they'll walk them through a process that they need to go through. You're talking about, Medicare cards, resume review. We could sit here and name all the different things that need to happen in order for a family to get established in the United States.
It is a lot of moving parts, and most of us just don't remember because we're not starting over from scratch, someplace completely, foreign to us. And so one of the things about housing is, there's already a housing shortage in the United States, especially of affordable housing. So we're already up against this crunch situation of having inadequate housing. And also it's more expensive in Northern Virginia than it is in other places. I know that there's, resettlement going on in Richmond. And I read an article in the Roanoke Times about a family that has 3 adult siblings who have settled in Blacksburg. And it happens that one of them was pursuing a PhD in Kabul. And so they have moved these 20-something siblings together in Blacksburg. And to your point about the sponsorship circle, the whole article in the Roanoke Times really was about how just a small group of people in the community got furniture and pictures on the wall and things for the kitchen and bedding and all of these things. And then they went in and set up this apartment for these 3 Afghan refugees. And now they're waiting on to get a permit so they can work, so, and that's very frustrating too. So they did connect them with Muslim American students at Virginia Tech. So it seemed to me like there was a lot of thought, and they came from New Mexico. So they originally landed in the United States in New Mexico. So a lot of people need to understand that some of these folks have been numerous places already, not just one place. They've already been a couple of places for short periods of time. But it seems to me that there is an effort to try to connect people either with a community that makes sense for them, to connect them with people living there who are Afghan or come from an Afghan community. There's an existing Afghan community in Roanoke, Virginia as well from decades ago. And so the effort to try to find a place where people can connect with culture, religion, language, food, all of the things, that make you feel like you are in a diaspora, as you said, with other people. That effort seems to be being made, but there's kind of this huge number. I think you said we're looking at 2,000 a month.
That's right.
That's a lot.
It is. 2,000 a month would be coming into the National Conference Center, but almost as fast as they come in, they'd be then sent out to the states that are going to be welcoming them through the resettlement agencies. So at any given point, you might have maybe 1,000 people there, right? Because you're going to have new people coming, and then you're going to have people that were there leaving. So you're going to have that, 2 to 4 weeks, I would say, of how long people would stay. And then, and again, this is something that we're still learning about. We're still understanding how this is going to play out. So we kind of have to wait and see how it goes. Things are slow to get started, as with any effort like this. It's going to take some time to get our sea legs under us in terms of what it's going to look like. But I will say that yes, they do everything they can to, let's say that there's an uncle or an aunt or somebody that they might be related to. They do everything they can to try to keep families together. When I went down to Fort Pickett, they had different days where you could go volunteer with the refugees. And I talked to a number of refugees where they were looking at family in Colorado or, Montana or California. And even some were saying, well, what's it like in Kentucky, or what's life like in Texas? Is it hot? And, so they're asking those questions, trying to figure out, okay, what part of the country would they want to go to? And where might they have family? So it's been an interesting process, certainly, for them in terms of exploration. And obviously, for those who speak English, for those who had more engagement with the U.S. government within Afghanistan, it might be easier for them to navigate what this looks like and ask those questions. But again, we have folks that don't speak English and, really aren't familiar with the different states and the different options that they could have. So it's a part, there's all kinds of education programs that the U.S. Council Catholic for Bishops, USSCB, everything's a big acronym, was running down in Fort Pickett, and they were doing all kinds of ESL trainings and, cultural orientation and, wonderful opportunities to engage with the children, especially all kinds of creative outlets. It's very difficult for someone to be creative and have anxiety at the same time. So when you have kids who have been through trauma, getting them into some kind of a creative activity helps mitigate the anxiety and the trauma that they would have experienced. And so it's a way to help them feel a little bit more at peace and have fun. Have a lot of fun. Puppet shows, drawings, games, all kinds of stuff we were doing with the kids down at Fort Pickett.
And that's again, imagine you've got all these people in a space that was not designed to hold people for any length of time. It's not a hotel. So things like when people were at the Dulles Expo Center, some of the efforts included providing luggage, because a lot of them were coming and they didn't even if they had an extra change of clothes, a lot of people didn't have luggage. The other thing was soccer balls. And that was the one thing, lots of donations of soccer balls. And you can understand that is something familiar, and it's a way for people to be outside and not be just inside all the time. And so, but again, people have got to wait and figure out who's coordinating things like that. What specifically is needed, and not just dump 400 soccer balls over at the conference center, because I think Americans have shown themselves to be incredibly generous.
Oh, yes.
At this time. And people are like, tell me what to do that I can help. And so basically, in talking with you tonight, we're trying to tell people it's coming. Your help is needed. We want you to stand by, but we have to do this thoughtfully, considering the large number of people that will be asked to help as they pass through our doors. So for those of you just joining us, this is Making Change Radio. And the change we're talking about here on Radio Fairfax is Afghan refugees coming to the United States, and specifically to Northern Virginia. And so Sonia Patterson has been working through Rotary. And there are numerous Rotary clubs in the Northern Virginia area. And if you're not familiar with Rotary, if you go to Rotary7610.org, which is the website for our district, you will find out where the clubs are. If there's a club near you, and you don't have to be a Rotarian in order to raise your hand and say, what do you need? What can I do to help? Because Rotary is a service club. We raise money and we, try to make an impact in our communities and around the world. And so in the last few minutes that we have before the segment ends, I just want to ask you to talk a little bit about specifically your efforts to reach out to Rotary clubs, because there are so many.
Right. Yeah, I mean, our thing is service above self. That's something that we really drive home at every Rotary meeting that we attend. Service above self. And so, what does that mean? It means giving of your time, giving of your talent, and giving of your treasure to help other people, and to do it well. To do it thoughtfully, not just to sort of volunteer or just give money or whatever. No, this is a thoughtful response. So in terms of what we've done at the district level in Rotary, oh my goodness, clubs have stepped up in so many amazing ways. We've had clubs provide affordable housing. Some of the club members provide affordable housing. We've had book drives. We've had resume reviews. We've had all kinds of donation drives. I organized this massive what I called Undie Sunday, which was like we picked a Sunday, I think it was back in October, and we had Rotary clubs and churches and everybody just collect brand new underwear and drop it off. And then all of the Rotarians came together and got that stuff down to Fort Pickett at the time. It was an urgent need that they had. And it was just a way that people have stepped up. They did that through providing coats as well. Back in, September, October, before the cold actually started, we did a massive coat drive. We got a lot of coats down to Fort Pickett, Quantico as well. Fort Lee had some refugees there, but they only had 900 to begin with. And so as refugees were resettled around the US, we really focused our efforts down at Fort Pickett, where we had at one point as many as 8,000 refugees down there. Yeah, it was a lot. And of course, those numbers were always, changing. But yeah, there were a lot of refugees there. And they did a fabulous job in terms of inviting different groups to come in alongside with the work that was happening already. And it was a team effort. And that's what Rotary does best. We support community organizations that have stepped up to make a difference in people's lives. And this is what we're doing now.
Yeah. And for those who may not be familiar with Rotary, it's been around for like 115 years or something. Yep. And there's 1.2 million Rotarians and 32,000 clubs around the world. And we just happen to have very strong clubs and a very strong district here in Virginia. And so there's no shortage of Rotarians or Rotary clubs to help in this effort, but it does require coordination. And that's why, I really felt like Sonia needed a platform to kind of get us all primed and ready for what we're going to be asked to do, whether you do it through your faith community, or you do it through a support circle, or you do it through Rotary. So please join us after the break.
We are Radio Fairfax.
Hello, my name's Matthew Moore, the host of the Psychedelic Circus. The circus has moved. I'm on Sunday nights now from 6 to 8 p.m. Join me for the Psychedelic Circus, where the buzz can shake you clean.
Okay, men, this is your time. Maybe you didn't choose this, but you're here now. You're gonna go out there and be an all-star caregiver. It's up to you. So what are you gonna do? You're gonna go grocery shopping, cook, clean, be there emotionally and physically. You gotta dig deeper. Drive them to physical therapy, doctor's appointments. Don't you forget about the pharmacy. I know you won't, because that's what caregivers do. Don't give up. Don't ever give up. This is your time to show the world, your family, and yourself that you're tougher than tough. Now go out there and be the best caregiver this world has ever seen. Caregiving is tougher than tough. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Airplanes fly. What's in this box? What does this thing do?
Kids are curious about everything, including guns. Learn how to store your gun securely and make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're talking with Sonia Patterson. She is stepping up to assist the Rotary District 7610, based here in Virginia. Specifically, we have a lot of clubs in Northern Virginia, and Sonia has stepped up in her professional capacity as someone who has worked in project management and philanthropy to help coordinate many of the aspects of meeting the needs of this influx of Afghan refugees to the United States. So when we went on break, Sonia, we were talking about housing and the fact that we don't have enough affordable housing now in this country for the people already living here. And so that presents a tremendous challenge, not just in Northern Virginia, everywhere. But what are some of the solutions to helping people find housing and to pay for it? Because some of these relief agencies, I think, pay for the first 90 days. And then, if you don't have a job or you don't have your work permit to get a job, so we have to, as a community, when we think about resettling refugees, we have to be realistic about long-term what that's going to look like. And that starts with getting people a place to settle, where the kids are in school, where you know how to get to a job when you have one. And that's kind of a heavier lift than I think most people are considering when they're thinking about people needing socks and luggage and winter coats. So talk to us a little bit about what some of these larger, bigger, heavier lifts are going to look like as we resettle folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Catherine, for this opportunity. It's fantastic to come together and talk about this because, getting the word out and helping people understand the things that we're facing, the challenges that frankly are not insurmountable, things that we can actually tackle if we would come together. And I think the answer to your question is twofold. I'm going to take it from the big picture perspective first and then break it down a little bit. From the big picture perspective, advocacy is the answer. Getting behind organizations like Voice that are working on affordable housing, getting in front of our state legislatures, even our national policymakers on this issue of affordable housing is absolutely critical. We have to come together at an advocacy level to be able to change hearts and minds. Now, taking it a step down, if you will, into sort of the practical, this is what we can do. Advocacy is still practical. I mean, I guess operational or sort of little tidbits, if you will, of ideas. One thing is if you own any kind of rental property and you're willing to provide that to a family, to an Afghan family, well, that's an opportunity right there. Airbnb, we've seen examples. Airbnb nationally has stepped up and said, you know what, we're going to step up and, a lot of our properties are available for this and we're going to, and this is what's going to happen. So, companies like Airbnb that can make those decisions have done that. People who have mother-in-law apartments or, kids who had their own entrance and exit in a larger house. Again, those are places that we can be thinking about. Now, it can't just be, I'm going to have somebody sleep on the couch.
Right.
Right. You really have to be thoughtful and give these, if you're thinking about a place, let's say that you have something in mind, but you're not sure whether or not that place would qualify or not, if it would be appropriate or not. Think about things like separate bedrooms, separate living spaces, its own kitchen, its own entrance, its own sort of security framework, if you will, so that the families could feel secure and also that they could have their space. Typically, culturally, they'll have a big rug and they'll sit there and they'll have meals out in a larger open space in the middle of a house or an apartment. So, what kind of things do you have in your own environment that might be able to fit this bill or this need, and just being super creative and thinking outside of the box, I think is really going to help us come up with, those ideas, because you're absolutely right. Affordable housing has been the number one challenge since the very beginning, when the refugees started arriving in the U.S.
And looking at jobs too, and I would hope that some people are understanding that there's a broad spectrum of skill sets that people are bringing. And so some of the higher level Afghans that actually worked as translators, for instance, and worked directly with the military, have a set of job skills that many of them want to stay in Northern Virginia because this is the place where they're most likely to get jobs that match their skill set. But other family members may not bring that kind of skill set. And these are the folks that might be looking to spread out to other Afghan communities across the United States, from Texas to Colorado to Montana, even. So if you are an employer or you work in an organization where you could have job openings available as people get the work permit,
Yeah.
that's also helpful, because the quickest way for people to be independent is
Yeah.
for them to get a job. And
Yeah.
again, it's not a quick process for, and a green card is like way down the road when you start talking about a green card. On average, I think it takes somebody 17 years to become a citizen of the United States. It is much longer than people think it is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the SIV visa holders have green cards, but still, even that process takes years and years, and it's very, very difficult. It's interesting. Even when you have someone who speaks English, you're still putting them into a brand new cultural framework. What does my resume need to look like? What are some keywords that I need to pull out? How do I interview? What do I wear to an interview? All of the things that a typical job seeker in the United States would have to go through, they are going to have to go through these steps. And so the ways in which I've seen Northern Virginia respond to this is that I've talked to women's entrepreneur groups, women's business groups, obviously Rotarians who own businesses, all kinds of stakeholders that understand what hard work looks like. You need to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and they're willing to do that. But at the same time, they need support. They need resume reviews. They need, practice interview skills. A lot of the resettlement agencies are offering comprehensive partnerships with nonprofits in the area that do those kinds of things. And so, it's something that we're all thinking about, but, it goes back to what we were saying earlier. There's a difference between sort of the short-term relief. Hey, I got to get, food and clothing and shelter, versus more long-term development, which is education development, job creation, things like that are going to, make sure that over time, they're going to be assimilated and working well within the American context.
And I hope people actually do got to get creative in how they think about this. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to Making Change Radio here on Radio Fairfax. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and we are talking with Sonia Patterson about the many needs of the Afghan refugees that are settling here in the United States. So I sit on the board of Grand Involve. We put retired seniors into the classrooms of Title I elementary schools here in Fairfax County. And when you think about the number of Afghan children who are going to be in classrooms, all classrooms, who may not speak English, that's something where is that a volunteer opportunity? Thinking about preschools, and there's a lot of faith communities that operate preschools. Are there openings, and are there people willing to volunteer specifically with these brand new immigrant preschoolers? I can just, off the top of my head, with the nonprofits that I also work with, think about the things that are long-term support that we may not be thinking of right this minute, and trying to find specifically people who speak the dialects, because not every Afghani speaks, the same dialect in their language. So I just see there's so many opportunities, and our listeners here can think about how they volunteer, the organizations with which they volunteer, and think about, can we carve out something specific to say, how can we meet the needs of these new, welcoming our guests who want to live here, or who are going to live here as our neighbors in our communities for the long term.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are all kinds of toolkits that have already been developed to answer all of those questions. If folks who are listening go to welcome.us, I know we've worked on toolkits for educators, for example. If you're in a school and suddenly a lot of Afghan refugee children show up in that school and you're the school principal, what do you do? And so we've developed toolkits for educators where they're going to have to be thinking differently about some things. And that's all out there. You're absolutely right. Lots and lots of nonprofits have stepped up. They've stepped up in tremendous ways. And it's really great. I love it. It's so inspirational. I love to see the American ingenuity at play where, okay, you know what? We've got something happening here that we're not really sure what to do. Let's come together and figure this out. And that's exactly what we've done. And I am just so proud to be a part of it.
And I discover and through Rotary too is a great way
Yeah.
to find nonprofits that you never heard of. And
Mhm.
so the Centerville United Methodist Church did a presentation on their programs to my Rotary Club. And one of the things they alerted me to is Gracing Spaces, which is a ministry here in Fairfax that takes furniture and rehabs the furniture and then gives it to people who need furniture. But it's not just like giving somebody an old sofa or a beat up dresser. The way Phil Moore described it, they're like Santa's workshop over there, and they actually rehabilitate the furniture and then make it available to people who need furniture. So I had never heard of this before, gracingspaces.com.org. And so even in our own communities, there are people doing things that maybe many of us do not know exist. And so, especially when you talk about donating furniture, and again, all these families are going to need beds, mattresses, dressers, things like that. And before you kind of like, I have a dresser, figure out if there's programs where, you can give it to a program who is going to coordinate and orchestrate and facilitate how to best deploy it for people who need it and make sure it's in good shape and that it's in working order. And again, there are so many considerations to be made. And one of them has to be, how do we welcome these families in our community spaces? So I live in Fairfax City.
Okay.
We have the 4th of July parade over here, and we have the Fairfax Fall Festival, and we have Rock the Block every Friday, every 4th Friday. And you think, how can communities, specifically, purposefully, intentionally reach out to let these new arrivals know that they are welcome in our communities? What might be, how would that look?
Right. Well, a number of great organizations come to mind. The resettlement agencies, specifically in our area, Lutheran Social Services National Capital Area, LSS-NCA, has just done a phenomenal job. They've responded in lots of very innovative ways, really getting staff organized and setting up programs and projects. They're a part of LARS, Lutheran Immigrant Refugee Service, which is a national one of the national refugee resettlement agencies, but they've also opened up an office in Northern Virginia as well. So, it's interesting that I think of Nova Raft, for example, or React DC, or Homes Not Borders. These are all examples of nonprofits that have stepped up in very creative ways to set up apartments, to streamline donations. One of the big things, you mentioned earlier, this whole thing about soccer balls. People want to help, and soccer balls are a great idea. But unless you have a soccer ball for every single child, what you're going to do is you're going to create jealousy, because one kid's going to get a soccer ball and the other kid's not going to get one. And one of our big guiding principles is do no harm. Do no harm. And so if the principle is do no harm, it means we either have soccer balls for everybody or we don't have soccer balls for anybody. Right. And so, you just have to be very thoughtful about that. So that's why these organizations are articulating to their, donors, this is what we need. And I would encourage people who are listening to jump on those websites and check them out and see how they can streamline. There are lots of Google groups on refugees and what have you that you can plug into. There's all kinds of Facebook groups that are, set up for this kind of thing, sharing information. As we mentioned earlier, Catherine, this is a day-by-day changing situation. I mean, it wasn't until a couple of days ago that we heard about the National Conference Center out in Loudoun County. So, I mean, we're not sure exactly what's going to be coming down the pike, but the fact is that we have the tools, we have the infrastructure, we have the people, the nonprofits are there. One of my big things, people tell me, oh, I'm passionate about, doing X. I want to start my own nonprofit. And I'm like, okay, do you know that there are over 1 million nonprofits in the United States? Are you telling me that there isn't at least one other nonprofit that's doing exactly what you just articulated? right? And then the person's like, oh yeah, I guess so-and-so does that. And I say, well, then what you can do is you can come alongside them and partner with them and help, reinforce what they're doing so that two are stronger than one. And in the sector generally, I think the consolidation that we've seen, the focus on collaboration that we've seen has been so refreshing and so wonderful, because previously people would maybe stay in their own lanes, if you will. I work in education, I work in healthcare, I work in whatever the sector may be. In this particular case, we've seen everybody do everything. It's been awesome, and so I think a lot of those barriers have been broken down, and I hope for people listening that they would be encouraged by that, because so many great people are doing such great things.
Well, there are so many organizations, and you mentioned some of them kind of in passing. For those of you just joining us, this is Making Change Radio here on Radio Fairfax. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and the other voice you hear is Sonia Patterson, who is talking to us about the many ways in which we can support and welcome Afghan refugees into our communities. So you touched briefly on healthcare too. At my Rotary meeting, Sarah John, who is a pediatrician in my club, is working with Neighborhood Health, and they are seeing and working with some Afghan refugees coming into their clinics. Also, HealthWorks out in Loudoun County. Carol Jameson is the CEO out at HealthWorks, and I'm sure they're going to be seeing a lot of these refugees. Talk a little bit about the fact that in the lily pads there has been health screenings, immunizations, vaccinations. They get COVID testing every 5 days. That is a need everyone is for health care. But one of the things Sarah pointed out is that people are not coming with their medical records, even from the Lily, even from, Qatar. They might have a vaccination, but they don't have any evidence with them. So this is, healthcare. When you start thinking about all the ways in which there are going to be serious challenges to trying to help people get settled and get what they need. But healthcare is certainly a big one.
Healthcare is a big one. And, this is all part of the resettlement process that refugees go through, getting set up with Medicaid and what have you. But you're absolutely right. You have to start from somewhere. So when they get to the lily pads and they start getting, some of them do have health records from Afghanistan, some of them don't. But you're talking about hepatitis A, hepatitis B, COVID shots, all of those things that people would need to document, if you will. It has to start somewhere. And so as they begin to build that paper trail, as they go from, let's say, the initial meeting to the second meeting to the third meeting, they're going to start to create that history. They're going to start to be able to show, oh yes, this is what happened when I was at this base and what have you. And there are certain protocols that all of the refugees are going through in terms of screening. And those documentation, the paperwork travels with each individual as they go through the resettlement agencies themselves. And so the record starts to build itself, but you're absolutely right. It's extremely challenging. You've got the language barriers, you've got even cultural issues around, just what's appropriate. Exactly. Right. Modesty.
Yes. Sarah talked about that too. And the fact that culturally, how they approach healthcare, especially where women and girls are concerned, is very different.
Right.
And there are cultural barriers. But I also see in all of these challenges opportunities for volunteers. And we don't know exactly yet what they will look like. But, children do have to fill out the paperwork and get the vaccination so that they can go to public school. And, there will be opportunities that will come along. And I hope that the Rotary District will, again, be sort of a nexus and have a list of some of the opportunities that if people can give an hour a week and be at a health clinic just to help people process their paperwork, we need to find those opportunities, because I think there's more than enough people willing, if we can tell them when, where, and how to show up to be of assistance. You mentioned in passing REACT DC and RAFT, Resettling Afghan Families Together, and the Afghan Youth Relief Foundation. REACT DC, I know that you mentioned in my Rotary Club, is an organization of Army moms.
Mm-hmm.
How fascinating is that?
I know they know how to get stuff set up, don't they? Yeah, I mean, and it's really great. They started out sort of, just stepping up, if you will, just like I did. But in my case, I've continued to be that coordinator and supporter of everything else that's going on. In their case, they actually set up a 501c3 and got themselves registered. So it's really interesting how their nonprofit was born and now how it continues. Kudos to them for doing such a great job.
Yeah, and I agree with you. There are unmet needs, truly unmet needs out there for which it's appropriate to like organize and get it going. But there are a lot of people who really don't know what's out there. I run
That's
across
right.
new nonprofits every day of my life that have
Yep.
been out there working, for decades, and I'm like, I've never heard of you. And
Mhm.
so it is important to look around, and I think the coordination effort is coordination of information and opportunity.
That's
And that,
exactly what it
and
is.
that's what I see
Yeah.
you doing is that
Yep.
kind of
Yeah,
coordination.
that's exactly what I've been doing. It's a privilege to be at the nexus of all of this information, but it's also a tremendous challenge because I have tentacles out there to almost every nonprofit, you can imagine. But even then, there's stuff that's happening that I'm not familiar with enough to be able to connect, the A to the B, if you will. So it's just, there's so many great things happening, but you're right. Somebody has to be on point to be able to grab this information, organize it. Organizing information for people is super important. Earlier, we talked about advocacy. Well, that's just one way to get involved. Obviously, donating money, that's another way to get involved. Donating your time, that's another way to get involved. And so all of the organizations, what I've done when I've communicated with people that have gotten in touch with me is I've said, okay, you tell me what you want to do. How much time a week do you have? What issues are you passionate about? How, do you want to work with children? Do you want to work with women? Do you want to work, setting up apartments? Do you, what is it that you would like to do? And then based on that answer, then I say, okay, here are 3 examples of nonprofits or other organizations you could work with that are doing those things so that you can come alongside them. So it's a process of iteration, right? Because yes, you want to be able to provide opportunities for people. And as you said, for Rotary especially, the district has all kinds of stuff happening at all these different Rotary Club levels. And I will say that that's not just our district. I'm working at the national level with Rotary. And I can tell you, and I work with the National Peace Corps Community for Refugees, which is an umbrella organization nationally that is made up of returned Peace Corps volunteers. And our mission is to really, help folks in the U.S. understand how to support refugee resettlement in the United States and educate and advocate for them in their behalf. And so what we've seen there is a strategic partnership with Rotary to say, okay, on a national level, how does Rotary think about, it's got a HQ and then it's got zones and it's got districts and it's got local clubs. So how do we pull a strategy together that empowers the clubs where there are refugees, as well as clubs in other parts of the country where there are no refugees?
Right.
So because those clubs still want to help, right? So Rotary itself is a very complex and, large organization even within our country, and that's just one example of an organization that stepped up. Lions clubs, Kiwanis clubs.
I'm glad you mentioned those because I was just about to ask you. So much is done over Zoom right now. Everybody's still virtual. But yes, the Kiwanis clubs, the Lions clubs, the JCs, the Greater Federation of Women's Clubs, the League of Women Voters does a lot of work. The Association of University Women, the American Association, AUW, does a lot of this kind of service work. Are you available to yes, I can give a presentation to your club about how we can all work together, or again, where the opportunities are based on the best information we have right this minute.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm absolutely available to meet with any of those clubs that would like to get together and talk about this. I feel like this is sort of how things have happened and evolved. And yeah, it's bigger than just one entity. It's bigger than Rotary. It's bigger than Kiwanis. It's bigger than than any one of those groups that you just mentioned. And one of the things that's wonderful about it is that it's going to take all of us. We all need to step up in our own ways, because as we were talking about earlier, responding to the needs of refugees is so multifaceted, and it's not just something that can be done immediately. It's something that needs to be done over the next 3 months, 6 months, year, 2 years, and so forth. So this is going to be with us for a while. And, we kind of need to figure this out. It's an opportunity for us to step up and help our neighbor in ways that we have not been called to do so before. And so it's stretching us as civil society members. And I think that's healthy. I think that's really good. And you know what? It's preparing us for whatever the future may hold in terms of additional refugees from other countries that might be coming to our shores. So, this is all good in terms of where we need to go. And I think tackling that, some misconceptions that folks might have about refugees and who they are, where they come from. The fact of the matter is they get more vetting than most Americans get in terms of just going through the process of registration and what have you. So, I love the fact we're talking about it. I love the fact that so many people stepped up, even though they don't all know what they're doing. That's okay. That's okay. We need to learn this together. We need to, come together. And that's what we're doing. So,
well, I appreciate your efforts, because I have found that Americans, Virginians, people in my hometown of Fairfax City are generous. They're generous, they're kind, and they're welcoming. And so it's important for us to think about the many ways in which at the neighborhood level, at our community level, that we individually, all of us, are the face of our country. And we need to represent the best of us in welcoming these traumatized people who were forced to leave their country for the sake of their own lives and the sake of their families. And this is tough to start all over again from scratch. And I just think you and me, and everybody who hears us on the radio tonight can understand that we are the welcoming committee. And there's a million ways that we can support these folks coming into our communities, and I hope we do. So thank you so much, Sonia. You are a wealth of information. I so appreciate you.
My goodness. Well, thank you, Catherine, for this opportunity, and all the people listening. I hope we have inspired you. I hope we've opened up new ideas in your minds, and we've touched your hearts, and we've helped you understand that there are very concrete things that you can do as individuals to support our Afghan neighbors that are coming here. It's going to take all of us, and we're looking forward to working through it together with you.
And to that, I say amen. That's it for us tonight on Making Change Radio on Thursday nights at 9 p.m.